There we go. So we're now being recorded. By the way, I noticed, and you may have noticed when I sent out a recording of the class, that it does show your faces, but not your name. Um, the
Oh,
recording will not show, show the name that we can now see on our each other's thumbnails.
when
So,
did you send out a recording?
oh,
When,
I
when
sent
did you send it out?
I sent everyone two recordings. They're YouTube recordings of the first
Oh,
lecture or class. It included two. It included one before class. I sort of do a run through, so it included my run through and it included a recording of the class itself.
okay,
Would
thank
you
you.
wave around? Put your hand up if you got that.
Yeah, I got it.
Okay,
I got it.
okay, all right. So, and purpose of those is one for review if you want. Two, for some folks have missed classes and asked that there be a recording available. And but also you're welcome to share them um, with anyone you want to share them with, as far as I'm concerned, or at least the one, and then the one that's just me talking, that's just the rap part. You can share that separately if you don't want to share the class itself. So I want to just say again that make sure that I have everyone's permission to do the recording. And then the other permission that I need is um, greetings. The other permission that I need is um, I have a class list, and I could send that class list to everyone, which includes names, phone numbers, and email. And that would allow you people to talk to each other. Is there anyone who would prefer that I not do that or that I take their name off it? Okay, so I'll give you the opportunity. If you send me an email the next day or two saying please take my name off that list, I will do that. And the other thing is when I address the invites, so far I use the BBC or whatever it is, so that I think you're not seeing each other's emails. And I would stop doing that if that's okay with everyone, so that you all would have each other's emails handy for any communication you want to make with each other. Is that all right? Again, if problem with any of that, you can email me separate. Send me an email in the next day or two, and before I move ahead. Other housekeeping. I think there was. Here's a housekeeping that may be utterly unnecessary because you all probably many of you are much smarter than me on this stuff. But for me, when I click the participants button, why don't you try it? I get the names of all the participants. And then when I want to click out of that, because it's taken up some of my windshield, I click, there's an item on the left, upper left, there's a downward arrow, and you click on that and it'll give you the opportunity to close the participants window. What I have done, and maybe none of you would ever think of doing, is I click the X on the upper right, and that takes me completely out of the whole class. Which, if happens, of course, you can just re-enter by pushing the invite again. But so, in case that's a problem for anyone else, and then I'll also tell you that if you want to aren't happy with the name that appears, if you push on your thumbnail the three buttons, it'll give you an opportunity to rename yourself, either a false alias or something that you think is more glamorous. But I prefer if you have your real name if you're comfortable with that. The only other piece of business was again that we're not doing a queue in terms of lining up for questions, and we're not using a question answer format. So and I may or may not see you to call on you, and you don't need to be called on. So the point is, you can shout out, you can wave your hand around, or you can push the little icon that would put a hand up in front of your picture to let the rest of us know that you're looking for an opportunity to share something. I think that's it. So today, I'm gonna do my rap for about 25 minutes. Then we're going to continue the introductions. We got only a little bit into the introductions. And if there's time, I want to start on the experiential part of the class, where we each get to practice some kind of a experiential thing to support us in accessing the wisdom of the life force, or however you want to say it. You may have a less schmaltzy way of saying it, but accessing the life force and guidance of the life force in each of us. So I'm going to start by just reviewing the basic. Actually, I'm going to do one other thing. I'm going to change the view to speaker view, which will put me front and center. I believe that the recording is happening. And here we go. So I want to review the basic concepts and the basic intentions of the course. And the basic intention is to provide sustenance and support, and to support the morale for those of us who are affected in various ways by the unraveling of the fabric of belonging, to each other and to the planet that seems to be unraveling and seems to be threatening to no longer be able to hold us in place and in relationship to the whole. And I want to support us in living both in recognition of that reality, that is to say, not in denial, but also with joy and gratitude. And give me a second here. Yeah, so I have it on speaker view. So if you make a sound, you will come up as the main picture, which is okay. Just so you know.
People can just turn off all their microphones, and that way it'll save bandwidth for some of us that are on satellite.
Yeah, I'll let everybody do that. I know I can turn everybody off, but I'll let you turn yourself off. Mute yourself. So how do we live both in recognition of reality, but nevertheless with joy and gratitude and purpose and meaning, and basically to gratefully receive the gift we've been given to, the immense gift of we've been given to being alive at this particular moment in the history of the universe, the planet, and our culture. And then I sort of defined the problem that we're dealing with as a crisis of belonging. How do we belong to each other as individuals, and how do we as a species find a healthy and the correct belonging to the planet, and how do we as a culture find our belonging on the planet? So the whole course can be called as an effort to support us in finding and reclaiming our belonging. And in the course of the course, we'll be refining that definition of what does true belonging mean. And I remember that I said last time that one way of looking at it is that we have made the same mistake at every level of our existence, that it is one mistake. And I've called it the great mistake, working off of, so the great mistake, off of David White's poem called Everything is Waiting for You, which we, give me a second here. Come on, Bobby. Okay, I think everyone is muted now. So the great mistake that our culture and our species is making multiple levels of our existence. And I called it, and so then I read, last time we put up the poem by David White called Everything is Waiting for You. That's recorded on the recording of last class. But the lines from that are most salient are, your great mistake is to act the dance as if you were alone. And I picture him talking to the mirror. He's not trying to be above everybody else. He's speaking to himself, but therefore for and to all of us. Your great mistake is to act the dance as if you were alone. And I'm going to pull out some more lines from that poem. To feel abandoned is to deny the intimacy of your surroundings. Alertness is the hidden discipline of familiarity. And that's what a lot of the experiential part of the class is going to be sort of about, developing our alertness to the hidden discipline of familiarity, where in discovering the familiarity of the world to us is a place to find the source of our belonging. And then he ends it with, put down the weight of your aloneness and ease into the conversation. So put down the weight of your aloneness and ease into the conversation. And so in calling it the same mistake, what I've basically said last time was that we're living in the paradigm of narcissism. I'm choosing that name. You could call it a lot of other things, imperialism, corporate capitalism, patriarchy, whatever. But in that mistake, the fundamental mistake there is believing that the world is essentially and can best be understood as a competitive struggle for dominance among fundamentally opposing interests. That's sort of what the fundamental architecture of life is and of the world is, and how it's best understood. And you can, so essentially that it's a zero-sum game. Existence is a zero-sum game. What's good for me is bad for you. What's good for you is bad for me. And you could summarize that as to do unto others before they do unto you. So, and then the other basic concept is that to cure or heal this, that the antidote to the narcissistic paradigm is to transition to what I've been calling a paradigm of communion, right? A paradigm, should be able to spell it if it's the core concept of the course, right? A paradigm of communion, which is to say a paradigm that recognizes the communion and independence of everything, the way that everything within the web of life is a co-creator of the web of life, and that our participation and being nurtured by and giving back to the web of life is the fundamental and unalterable condition of our existence and survival. And so essentially recognizing belonging. In support of this hope, the course hopes to offer a map, which is the paradigm, essentially a map, sort of you are here map, with the idea that being oriented and knowing where you are in the larger scheme of things is part of belonging. To offer two, a community of support for each of us to find our belonging, and also for each of us to sort of explore what unique gifts, accumulated wisdom, passion, heart, we have to offer to the process of, to offer to the process of transformation. Where do we belong in the transformation that nature's asking of us? And then 3 will be experiential exercises, which are about accessing the internal, making it easier and supporting the ease with which we can access the internal guidance and resources that we've been bequeathed by our long in the evolutionary process of our long dialogue and interrelationship with nature in our evolutionary process. So the guidance that has been adaptive in us and explains to some degree why we're here, how we got here. So today so that's sort of a recap. And today I want to talk more about the map, which is to say the concept of a paradigm. And what I said was that that the paradigm can be mapped as a series of nested concentric circles, in each of those realms, what I'm calling the narcissistic paradigm is presently dominant, and in each of which of those realms, the transformation and healing and rebirth of something of a different way of being needs to be born, and that I'm hoping we can be each in our own way be part of that rebirth. And so those realms are essentially how we treat ourselves, intrapsychic, how we treat ourselves internally, interpsychic, how we treat other human beings, interracial, international, relationships between the sexes, economic relationships. I think I already said international relationship, but working outwards towards a larger and larger, our relationship to other species, our relationship to nature, and ultimately our relationship to the sacred, however we conceive and live our relationship to the sacred. So the negative side of calling that a paradigm, the danger is that it's pretty daunting, because it's essentially saying, we're surrounded, that it operates on every level of our life. And among the things that implies is that it's so ubiquitous that it's largely invisible to us. It's largely unconscious, as water is to a fish. It's simply the environment we're in. And which is why I think getting more precisely conscious of how it operates in every element of our life is really important in the process of knowing where we are, being oriented, and then having an ability to resist and transform it. Yeah. Sorry, even without my droopy bracelet, I'm still making banging noises. So that's the negative side. My God, it's got us on every level of our life, and it's so ubiquitous. But the positive side of that is that it also can be resisted, healed, and transformed at every one of those levels, and that that we can participate in the healing in any of those levels by living our lives in the belief and in the faith that we're all in this together, that the hole in the other guy's side of the boat is our problem, unlike the narcissistic view. And when we manifest the belief and the faith and live in recognition of the fact that we're all in this together, we're participating in the birth of the new paradigm. Now, by new, I don't mean this is some new thing we're inventing. The counter forces have been developed and lived within the dominant paradigm, and we've all, in one way or another, been touched by and moved by and participated in that already. The other positive side about paradigms, and this is really important, is that paradigms have a life cycle. So like trees and humans and birds and bunny rabbits, but also mountains and continents, they rise and fall. So it is built in to everything in life, but two paradigms, that they are born as a correction of the blind spots of the previous paradigm, that they blossom and fulfill themselves and allow new potentials to happen, that they wear out as the deficiencies of as their deficiencies become problematic, and they give birth to something new. So that's the place where calling it a paradigm is, I hope, not just depressing. Which is why I'm talking about this. So what that means is that the new order is birthed within the old one. It's not old new. The new order is birthed within the old one as an ongoing and accumulating response to the contradictions and blind spots of the dominant order. Now, it's not a new idea. For example, Hegel talked about dialectics, and that was a cornerstone of his philosophy. And so he was talking about how a worldview or an idea goes this way, and then the contradictions of it give birth to something different, and that's how the history of ideas works. Now that, of course, was on the philosophical level, so it's basically about concepts and the evolution of concepts. Marx, who was a student of Hegel's and a philosopher first before he became an activist, said, "Well, let's talk about dialectical materialism." So we're not just talking about a dialectics of notions, of concepts, but a historical dialectic that includes social structures and the concrete material aspects of the evolution of human history, and how historical change happens. So I want to use the and then there's been a lot. I can't remember the guy who wrote the original book that made um, paradigms the big thing, sort of a buzzword. But we're using paradigm to include concepts, ideology, and worldview, but also to include social structures and social relationships and habits, also to include in institutions, also to include the physical infrastructure, roads, dams, nuclear weapons that are manifestations of that paradigm, and the sort of imprint or footprint. Now I'm purposely banging the footprint of human beings on the natural world. So I want to talk about as an example of this process of the evolution of paradigms. I want to talk about the evolution from the medieval worldview to the Enlightenment paradigm. And this is going to be very simplified and crude, of course, but that essentially the Enlightenment was a rebellion against the medieval world order. And we need to understand that because this was a very progressive thing at its birth. And by now, I believe that what I'm calling the narcissistic paradigm sort of represents the senility and death throes of the Enlightenment view. So the medieval social structure was based on received authority. The basic idea was that God empowered the king empowered the nobles, and nobles hired craftspeople, and all of that rested on the bottom of the peasants who produced the food that made it possible for all these people to eat. And that order was sanctified. The authority of that order was sanctified by religious authority. That there was religion authorized and sanctified that social order. And the authority of that social order was based on a cosmology, which said this is how God made the world, and it's how the world was constructed, and therefore it's how it's our duty to live in keeping with the laws of God, and which are the laws of the universe. now you'll notice that now any paradigm to exist has to serve somebody or some, it has to serve some people, or it wouldn't come be birthed. And hold on. Oh yeah, thank you. Peter says Thomas Kuhn. Thomas Kuhn wrote the best known book about paradigms. Thanks, Peter. Um, so in general, a paradigm um, serves the interest, serves entrenched interest, serves the interest of the class that's most empowered by that paradigm. And you notice that what happens is, so this paradigm served the existing medieval power structure. And you notice that what happens is that the power structure, the hierarchical power structure, is projected into a cosmology. Oh, this must be how the world works. God must be to us like a king is to the rest of us. So the social structure is projected onto the cosmology, and then the cosmology is used to justify and authorize the social structure. Namely, we're just living, we're just creating a social structure that fits how the world is made and fits how God made the world. So essentially, you end up, when you're within the paradigm is saying this is just the way things are. It's just the way it is. Now, the Enlightenment was in a rebellion against received wisdom and received authority. And it was a movement to free the intellect over religious dogma and to free the individual from conforming to outdated social beliefs and structures. So it was about freeing the individual and the intellect. And in that sense, it was progressive in relationship to the structures of received authority out of which it was born. And the most famous, summary of that is Descartes saying, "I think, therefore I am." And in that phrase is both the revolutionary and progressive aspect of it, the freedom of thought. But it also, the shadow side of it is, you'll notice he didn't say, "I feel, therefore I am." "I love, therefore I am." "I experience life, therefore I am." "I am connected to life, therefore I am." "I am related to other living things, therefore I am." "I have intuition, therefore I am." "I have unconscious wisdom, therefore I am." "I have a body. Therefore I am." "I'm an organism, therefore I am." So a lot of things that are left out in the privileging of the individual intellect as the force that we're trying to free and celebrate and have the guiding force of our new paradigm. Now that led to a blossoming of science and technology and industry, unlike anything that was ever seen before or could ever have been imagined before. And we can have some gratitude for that. There are things that we're, I personally, about 6 years ago, had a bypass surgery that has played a role in my being here today. So there are reasons to be grateful to the amazing things that have been, created by the human intellect, freed to guide science and technology and progress. And part of the reason for the dynamism of the new paradigm, see, in the medieval paradigm was a stagnant paradigm. That can be good or bad. I'm just saying it didn't have, it was, well, it was stagnant in the sense that the surplus that the society created, which essentially the peasants created, the ability to produce more value than is required to create it. So the social surplus was handled, went to the nobility, and they used it for their lifestyle, for feasts, and festivals and jousting matches and art and tapestry and beautiful art and wars and armor and weaponry and whatever. But it was used to maintain the cultural lifestyle of the elite, and it was not plowed back into the production process. Now, the new capitalist ruling elite was different, and why it ended up triumphing was because it poured the surplus of the society, what gets produced beyond what's needed for ongoing daily life, was the profit of capitalist corporations. And that profit was not used, it's also used for yachts and God knows what, but largely it's reinvested in the production process. So it's recycled back. And so the production process is constantly increasing in and modernized in its ability to be productive. And that's where you get basically, that's the foundation of the economic growth that we have come to depend on and expect. And so economic growth became the new God. And all of the defenses of the roles of capital, of the privileges of capitalist corporations would be that, look, this has gifted us the economic growth that we all, that's the foundation of how we live our lives. We'll talk more about that. Now, the downside of this transition, which we'll be developing a lot in the course of the class, but the downside is that we find ourselves now, I want to say that the Enlightenment paradigm sort of morphed into and degenerated into what I'm calling the narcissistic paradigm, and where we are now. We're now seeing the downsides of that paradigm, including the downsides of what were once progressive ideas. So now we have individualism, which Enlightenment celebrated. We have individualism gone amok, gone wild, gone crazy, loosed in a harmful way. And we see that the social surplus is controlled by giant corporations whose only interest is to maximize their profit and then to reinvest it in a way that will further maximize their profit, which is sort of the greed is good thing. Now, there are reasons about that, things about that that are useful, but ultimately they're not they are not responsible to any kind of a social process. Those decisions get made on the basis of the profit maximization calculus of large corporations. That's how the society's social surplus gets controlled and invested. So the downside is individuals and corporations are not accountable to a public or general good or general interest, and that private profit and private interests are not are not subordinated to public interest, and we don't have the institutions we have not yet developed. We have some institutions, regulations, and stuff like that, but those are always playing defense against the basic motor of how a capitalist economy works. So it's not accountable to the needs and interests of people, and it's not the system, and it's not accountable to the needs of nature. And it's also created a science that is not accountable to the social good. So the basic ethics of science is, I'll call it scientism because that gets complicated, but let's call it scientism. So that practical science, the basic ethics of that is, why are we doing this? Because we can. We do it because we can. And also it has to be profitable, so it gets invested because we can, and because a profit can be made to do it. And there is no subordination of that to, should we do it? Is it in the interest of humanity or nature to do it? There's not not an adequately powerful social mechanism for controlling that. And just a couple examples, gene manipulation can be used in good ways, but Monsanto can use it to create to create private control of seeds and to create seeds that so that the plants can resist more and more pesticides, and so that the crops get made with more and more pesticides, and that makes profit for the pesticide industries and also is the basis of increasingly unhealthy monoculture. Or one that blows my mind is the self-driving car thing. Why are we making a self-driving car? Because we can, and because someone can make money off it. But there doesn't seem to be a discussion. Okay, is that a good thing? Do we want self-driving cars? What about the people who will be unemployed? Think of the number of people who make their living driving cars who aren't trained to do other kinds of jobs. So they're all unemployed. And then do we as a society take responsibility for the decision to have self-driving cars and to take care of the people who become unemployed? No. And for me, much more basically, do I want to be on the road and the guy and the car next to me doesn't have a human being in it? So those with as a social decision-making process that's happening, but there's not a mechanism for it to happen because we can. We're doing it because we can. So I'm saying the progressive aspects of the Enlightenment movement morphed gradually into the paradigm of narcissism, which is essentially I'll call it the senile version of that paradigm, and all of the costs that we're experiencing now, which include global warming and extinction. So it's largely because that paradigm works unconsciously that I think a lot of us have the feeling that we're on an autopilot flight to some place where none of us want to go and where none of us have been consulted whether it's where we want to go. So I'm saying we're now at the point where the costs of the narcissistic paradigm have become clear and unsustainable. And we can go on and on about that, but the obvious things are crumbling social fabric and alienation, depression, anger, and grief of human beings, endless wars and conflict, environmental destruction, mass creation of refugees who are trying to find a place to survive on the planet, the extinctions, including the potential extinction of our own species, global warming, and so forth. So what I'm saying is that we are tasked by nature with birthing something new within the interstices of the old, and that the new thing will be birthed out of the contradictions and the failings and the failed promises of the old. And the failed promises are important because if freedom or democracy or freedom from poverty, freedom from oppression, if some of the high values of the Enlightenment movement, if the system has failed those values, then we get to build a new thing also out of the failed promises of the old system. So in this course, again, the hope is to provide a map and to develop it, to offer a community in which we can support each other in resisting, healing, and transforming, and finding our place within that transformation, each of us. And I want to offer practices that can help us each access the guidance of the life force within us that is the evolutionary inheritance of our species' ancient dialogue with the rest of existence. And so essentially it amounts to supporting each other to belong to each other and the planet. And that's my wrap for today. And so we can do a little conversation about, we can talk about that a little more if we want to, and then I'd like to move on to introductions, and maybe we may or may not have time to do it. And I'd like to start a little experiential piece today, but which we'll see whether there's time for that or not. All right, I am going to go to the gallery view so that we can see. I think we're all on this. I think we can see all of each other. Well, I'm going to have a look at the chat. There's a number up there. Oh, that's the Thomas Kuhn. That's Peter reminding us that Thomas Kuhn is the guy who most recently popularized the notion of paradigm. Yes, Kathy. Oh, wait. So why don't y'all unmute yourselves?
Unmute. Okay, can you hear me now?
Yep.
I just
And
unmuted
someone
myself.
reminded us last time that Borg did, I think, that if you just push, you can do an unmute thing, but you can also just push your space bar and that'll unmute you.
Oh,
Go ahead.
okay, thank you. So yes, thank you. Excellent, thought-provoking talk. And yeah, I wanted to share that my father was a psychology professor, and so in my growing up, psychology, the whole world of psychology was a big deal. And one of the things that he and I used to get into a lot of conversations about was selfishness versus altruism. Okay, now you're talking about narcissism. And so, I recently, before I even joined this class, came to a decision that the whole conflict between selfishness and altruism was a really key point in our current mess that we're in. And the idea that a lot of people have, which is that selfishness is the natural way, that Darwin's teaching led us to believe this, which it does not, that Adam Smith's teaching led us to believe this, which also has been contradicted. Um, and that it's okay, therefore, to act in a selfish way. Okay, so we could go, this could be a huge discussion, and I hope
Yeah.
it will. But I just wanted to add that into what's going on here today, because my father and I's the conclusion that we often, several times I remember reaching, was that people acted in both ways, depending what was appropriate for the occasion. That, and of course, some people leaned it more towards altruism and others towards selfishness, but in general, that both were part of human nature, and that to go forward, one of the things that we as activists or whatever should be promoting is really this, and it has been. I mean, I've heard other people talking about this, that altruism is really much more the way to go, although selfishness is of course appropriate in certain cases, but to push back against this common paradigm, which is really leads to criminal behavior, leads to people,
Yeah.
people like Trump and so forth.
Yeah.
So
Wonderful. So that's right on. And what I want to respond to a little bit. Um, in the narcissistic paradigm, there's a fundamental assumption that taking care of the self and taking care of other are in contradiction. And in certain ways they are. So one way to look at it is to say that, oh, I'm saying that we should move from a selfish to a generous, or whatever you want to call it, way of being in the world, and that there's advantages to the generous one. And I agree with that. But what I also want to say is that in the narcissistic view, not just the view, but in the institutions of our society, taking care of self and taking care of others are seen as fundamentally in contradiction and are in contradiction. So the implication is if you want to be nice to other people, you should sacrifice yourself. And if you want to take care of yourself, you should the hell with other people. And I'm saying if you look so I'm saying, but I'm saying that's a false, that dichotomy is a false underpinning of the narcissistic point of view, because it implies that the more deeply and fully and completely I am myself, the less I'm able to connect to and care about you. And I want to say the opposite. I want to say that actually, the more deeply we are ourselves, the better we take care of ourselves, the more we love ourselves, the more we treat ourselves kindly, the more we're in a deeper position to recognize our kinship um, with other human beings and the things that they're struggling for. So, on a superficial level, self and other are in contradiction. And the now this goes to the question of polarities. So so if you set up a polarity, individual, my hands never look right to me because they don't go in my picture. It's a mirror image, so they don't. I can't make them go where I want them to go. But in the polarity that the narcissistic system celebrates and bases itself on, um, being taking care of number one and caring about other people are in contradiction. And I'm saying that's true on some level, but the deeper down you go, then you're at a level where they are not in contradiction. Then you're at a level where we are, because the unity, it's not that we want to compromise. Let's be nice to some people, or let's be nice on Tuesday and Thursday, and let's be selfish on Wednesday and Friday. It's not balancing that out or coming to a compromise. It's finding the place where taking care of me and being selfish, taking care of self, is not in contradiction, but is part of being connected and in communion with the other. And I think the more deeply, and so that's the underlying unity that holds the polarity. Give me just a second to make sure I've said this as clearly as I know how right now. I need a minute to think about that. So, um, and so in the paradigm of communion, it would be a celebration and understanding of the fact that taking care of self and taking care of others are not fundamentally, they're conditions of each other. They're conditions of each other rather than in a fundamental opposition, except on the most superficial level. And that's one. Two, one of the things he said that I thought was really cool was, that once the selfish instincts are appropriate for some situations, and the empathic um, instincts are appropriate to others, and I think that's right. And I think we have, and we'll talk more about this, we have internal systems to deal with how to take care of number one when we need to, when we are in danger, when we are threatened, when we are unsafe, and those kick in then. And we have a set of instincts and hormones and everything else that kick in when we feel in communion and safe and in connection. And I think that has big implications, because it means if you create a society in which people experience their belonging and their safety and their and being part of, um, that will promote people's affiliative instincts. And if you're in a situation where everybody is threatened, scared, and feels like their survival is threatened, they will correctly and necessarily go to take care of number one, because you got to take care of number one. So we'll be developing and start to develop the idea of belonging as being the place where you are both fully yourself and accepting and using all of the gifts and potentials that nature has given you, and fully in respect of and in connection and communion with everybody and everything else, and where you find the place where those are ultimately not in contradiction. That was a long answer. I'm done with that. Helga.
You're not going to like what I say.
Uh-oh. Should I close my ears or should I listen anyway?
I think that you are polarizing things that are not as polar. And to always think of two poles is so antiquated. Excuse me. So, okay, today I had an experience of, you would call it selflessness, because I took care of somebody else. But anyone who's a mother or has a pet or anything does take care of others. I just don't get it. So what I experienced is when I tried to help a homeless friend who had both arms broken, sitting there, because he cannot take care of himself, there has to be a social structure to do the taking care of for him. But my experience was to get through that rule-driven, tangled mess of rules and regulation to get anything to happen for him was phenomenal.
Yeah.
And the only way he got help eventually was to go to an authority, orthopedic surgeon, who was able to do things for him. So was I supposed to let him sleep on the street outside because the shelters didn't have room or didn't want him in there? I couldn't do it. He slept
Right.
in my garage. We brought
Right.
all his stuff over.
Right. And I think
But
the fact that we
I
don't
don't
have,
feel that that is selfless. I don't feel it is selfless. I don't want to be praised for doing it. I know him.
well,
How
I,
can
I
I
don't
not
think
do
it was
something I
selfless in the
know?
sense, I don't think it was selfless in the sense that you were being true to yourself. And it turned out that being true to yourself it involved helping someone else. And that's kind of what I'm saying.
Why are you playing with
That's my way of
words? You're
getting
playing
out of
with words.
this is my way out of the polarity. I'm saying you were being yourself and that was helpful to someone else. And you were both, it wasn't you surmounted the contradiction by saying this, by acting in a way that was true to you and that was helpful, and being true to you was helpful to someone else.
No, you missed my point.
Okay.
Point is that I wasn't able to do things until people with the authority, like you were talking about the king and who got the power and who it was delegated to, until I was able to reach those people through, he had to do it. Nothing happened. I couldn't have done anything.
Right.
Except
And so
fucking murder.
one of the things that happens in a society where we don't take care of each other is that individuals are left with either saying, I can't, I can't. So for me, I can't take every homeless person home that I see, and so part of me goes like, I don't even want to see it because I can hardly do that. So
Right? I don't do that.
hang on, let me finish.
Okay.
I have to either blot it out or I have to say, okay, why don't y'all come onto my house and I'll organize my life around housing all of you. So the fact that we don't have social institutions to take care of it puts someone like you that's a good person in order to be true to yourself, that you felt like you needed to do what you did. And that was not selfless, but it was you being you in a way that connected you to another human being.
Anyone who's not connected to other people would be not considered quite sane, in
Well,
my
I agree with
opinion.
you on that. I agree okay, I'm gonna move on, but I want to say the thing you said was, well, why do you see things so polarly? And I want to say,
Yeah,
we'll
two
talk more.
only, two.
My turn. My turn. I'm going to say about that I think the human mind does perceive things in terms of polarities. That's a fun.
Mm-mm.
But just let me say what I want to say. The human mind does see things in terms of polarities. That is how we map north, south, east, west. And so, on the one hand, when you're mapping, a polarity is of some use. and at the same time, uh, the polarity gets transcended as we find the underlying unity that contains and holds polarities. And in this case, it would be, what is a view that contains and holds the fact of being fully oneself and being fully connected to others? So I'm going to leave this conversation at that point. Let's see what someone else has to say. Thank you, though.
I was just reflecting on something that Helga said, and I don't know if I've got it accurately, and something you said, Bob, but I think that we are in a spot in our situation where having some structure, whether government, king, or whatever, is functional in a dysfunctional way, in that it does help us to be able to engage and bring systems, like Helga was saying about the doctor. I think maybe it was that by having a doctor who is like the middle level person, be able to use the connections to get those things. And the question, of course, comes in my mind, how are we able to balance having necessary social structures, doctors, governments, whatever, in a way that doesn't become dysfunctional for everybody else? And that's a challenge, because there is a necessity for structure. I worked in child welfare. I saw the function, and I saw the disastrous dysfunction of that system as well too. Yet without it, where do you go? So it is a challenge for us, I think, to balance structure with decency, maybe, and
Yeah.
effectiveness.
Yeah, exactly. Great. So
It seems to me that
go ahead.
it seems to me that Helga pointed out an example of where someone playing a communal kind of role talked an authority into working for the common good.
Mm-hmm.
Helga's saying no. But I had a little bit of the same reaction that Helga brought up at the very beginning of what she was saying, that you're presenting labels for whole periods of time in society's history.
Mm-hmm.
And those labels are useful, but there's a whole in between the opposites in those labels. There's a whole in between. People like Helga, for example. They don't acknowledge the whole span of society. Right now, we think of ourselves as very polarized, but there certainly are large numbers of people who are not polarized, who are trying to already function in the kind of role that I think you're suggesting.
Yeah, so I agree with that, and that's, I mean, the danger of a model, whatever, is that it's a huge simplification, and that simplification is either useful or not, but that's why I tried to stress the idea that the contradictions, the new ways, are ongoingly birthed within the old system, and we certainly experience that. We certainly, so I do think that the narcissistic paradigm is dominant enough that it's useful to identify it, and that we're living our lives largely in a large way in that context. And the danger of talking about it that way would be that it doesn't adequately stress the birth and the birthing and a lot of the beautiful progressive stuff that is happening in our society, and that is part of why we feel happy in our lives, and part of the ways where we feel connected, and that life is a good thing and has positive things to offer, and that connecting with all the things that keep us going. I don't want to bury those in the notion of the paradigm, but I think it is useful I think it's still useful. Someday it won't be, and that'll be great. I think at this point it's still useful to say that those things are in opposition to and a healing and a contradiction of a lot of the fundamental views and structures of our society. And that gets, and it actually, the economist part of me sees that a little more than the psychotherapist part of me, because if you're just operating on the spiritual psychological level, you can say, look at all these changes that are happening, but they are happening in a society where the economic and the military and the physical structures are even more the realm of the dominant paradigm. And if we don't recognize that, then we don't take part in some of the levels that the change has to happen. So we aren't just people with to have nice ideas while the people actually running the place are blowing it up, essentially. Should we move to go ahead, yeah.
Oh, well, I was this is I'm really enjoying this class, and it's really helping me to think big thoughts that I don't usually have that much opportunity to think about. So I appreciate that. And the way I usually think about the paradigm we're in is that we are a species that is part of the natural world. And that as any species, we need resources, and that those come from the environment. And there is within our species competition for those resources. And for the last several hundred years, we have moved towards a paradigm of reliance on macroeconomic market systems that in a way have done a lot to promote the well-being of the whole planet, in the sense of maximizing the exchange between countries and within countries to produce more output, to the point where we're suffering from our own success in a way. We have shared the bounty of modern capitalism with China, with India. They are now on the verge of superpower status because the global market system has been quite bountiful. And you can think of markets as being somewhat altruistic in the sense of transferring wealth from the rich to the poor, because the poor will work harder at lower wages, et cetera, et cetera. Now we're at this point where China wants to have the standard of living of Americans, and India does. Now, these are very populated countries, and they're starting to drive cars, and they're starting to have a wealthier, the wealth to afford a diet that is very resource intensive, et cetera, et cetera. And we're seeing, as a result of the success of globalization, increasing competition for scarce resources, and of course the increased burden of pollution, et cetera, on the planet. Now, because of this competition for these scarce resources, we are now moving to, unfortunately, I think, to another paradigm that may preclude us getting to your paradigm. And that is when we are now competing, we begin to become more nationalistic, in our emphasis on, and so what we're seeing now, for example, in the Ukraine crisis, very apparently, the reversion to an older paradigm of competition between nation states
Excuse
and
me,
a
excuse
reversion
me.
to autocratic systems.
Excuse me. Thank you. I think you're making some really good points, but I think we're running out of time.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm being a little too, I guess to cut to the chase, I'm worried that we are now reverting to a paradigm of competition and nationalism and a fear-based system in the world that may cause us to never get to the paradigm you're talking about. That's
Right.
my
Yeah.
concern.
Okay, so that's well thought out, and we're going to be addressing a lot of that. The economic system, the um, the international economic system, and its relationship to nationalism. And so we're going to
I
be developing
appreciate
that.
that.
And
Thank you.
there'll be a place for talking about that in more detail. I do want to just briefly, I think the fact that this is just a tidbit of what's to come. I think that the failure of the nation state to stand up to increasingly international corporations that are not beholden to any state and therefore not can't be held accountable to any state is part of the birth of a right-wing nationalism, which is to say that we need to find something that we can have some effect on, because international capitalism is in some ways beneficent and in some ways just spreading, some ways not. So, but we'll talk about that some more. So let me tell you time. So we have 20 minutes left, and I'm a little torn. I could do an experiential piece, or we could move ahead with introductions, but it was just give us a few introductions. I'm kind of tempted to do an experiential piece and then uh, move ahead, postpone some of the introductions and maybe, yeah, that's what I'd like to do. How do people feel about that?
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Sure, but Bob, can I make a suggestion?
Yeah.
That maybe next week, I think doing experiential is good because then we'll get into the meat of the class. But it'd be kind of fun for me because I would like at the very beginning of the class next time to do the introduction, because then the context for some of their comments. Or maybe through experiential, we can do introduction, but maybe we could do it at the beginning briefly next time.
All right,
Just a thought.
let's do that. No, I think let's do that. The reason I wanted the sort of basic idea of what we're doing in the course to be a context for the introductions, but I think we've established that. So I think that's a good plan, actually, to start with introduction. And everyone might just think about how, what you want to introduce or share about yourself is relevant to what we're doing here. And in particular, what brings you here? What would you hope for from the class? All right. Whew. Now that was a very cerebral process. And how do we get to something else? Um, so my interest in the experiential part is to support us in accessing and celebrating and riding the life force. And I think our existing paradigm tells us that if we go deep into ourselves, we will find ourselves fundamentally selfish and disconnected. And I'm saying that I do not think that is true. I'm thinking that our evolutionary process and our ancient dialogue with nature has bequeathed us a internal guidance and a plethora of resources for finding our connection and our belonging in existence. And I'm interested in doing that because I think the change that we want to make and participate in is not sort of in spite of ourselves and is not an efforting or a depletion or a using up of our resources. I think that's a formula. Early in the movement, it was all about struggle, struggle, struggle. And I want to say that I don't think that self-sacrificing struggle is how we can participate usefully in the change. I think we can participate usefully in the change by celebrating and appreciating, accepting the gifts of life that we've been given and to ride that, to be sustained by it and buoyed by it in a way where we're not creating the energy to do what needs to be done, but where we become manifestations of and vehicles of and expressions of nature and the life force as it emerges within us. So my interest is in helping each of us to strengthen our connection to that and our ability to be nourished by it. Sometimes I have the image of a hose. If the life force is a hose, we're not creating the pressure, we're not creating the energy, but we may be able to point it. So, and another interest of mine is in having quick and dirty access to that, as though it were a favorite place in the forest that you know how to get to, and the more often you get to it, the easier it is to find it again, and the easier it is to go there when you need it, and the easier it is to integrate it into how you're living. And I want to share a poem now that's a sort of about that. So in some way, I'm going to call this. I am not a disciplined, experienced meditator. I have not spent years on a mountaintop or even in very long retreats. So what I'm trying to offer here is I'm going to call it quick and dirty access to our spiritual center. And I'm going to put up a poem as a way to, hold on a second here, as a way to say that. So this is Mary Oliver. This is a poem most of you probably know. It's called Wild Geese. And she says, you do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert repenting. So this is the quick and dirty part. You don't have to. I'm not saying let's all go and spend a year in seclusion and then we'll be able to access something in ourselves that otherwise we can't. You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. Tell me about despair, yours, and I will tell you mine. Meanwhile, the world goes on. Meanwhile, the sun and the clear pebbles of the rain are moving across the landscapes, over the prairies and the deep trees, the mountains and the rivers. Meanwhile, the wild geese, high in the clean blue air, are heading home again. Whoever you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers itself to your imagination, calls to you like the wild geese, harsh and exciting, over and over, announcing your place in the family of things. All right. So, get yourself comfortable. Again, you don't have to do any fancy position or whatever else, just whatever helps you to feel comfortable in your body in the moment. Close your eyes if that helps you. Yeah, close your eyes. And I'm going to ask you to imagine you've just woken up in this moment in your body. How do you know beyond a doubt from your own experience that you are not a marble statue of yourself, but a living being, a living organism? What do you feel? What sensations that you know that are yours without any doubt, without anyone needing to agree with you? How do you know beyond a doubt in your own experience that you are a living creature? How do you experience that in the moment? Is it a vibration or a buzzing or a sense of energy in your hands and fingertips? Do you feel it, especially sensations in some part of your body? Do you feel it throughout your body? Is it a great storm that's happening all about your body? Or is it a quiet, something very quiet, like a little spring in a great desert, or a little sprout in the desert that calls for your exquisite attention in order to perceive it? However you're experiencing your aliveness in the moment, offer it your full attention. Offer it the feeding of your generous attention. And see how those sensations grow or shift. You might want to see if you can spread the sensations you feel in some part of your body into your whole body, into all of the interstices and spaces of your body. And see if you can feed the buzzing of life within yourself. And how do you perceive that? With no judgment about whether it's strong and powerful or tender and vulnerable. And what you are experiencing is not some mystical thing. It is the literal process and existence of life in you as a living organism. It's the pulsations and the sensations and the flows and the rhythms of your living being. There are campfires in the mitochondria of every cell of your body. Those campfires are serviced by rivers of blood that deliver nutrients to every cell and that take away, the used and discarded part that, it needs to be excluded by every cell. There are windstorms of energy that flow, of hormones and energy that flow through every corner of your body. there's a network of infinitely fine neural connections that connect every part of your body and through which flows energy and communication. Nature lives in you and in the processes in you just as much and in the same way that it lives outside of you. See if you can land in your immediate experience in the moment of your livingness, the literal livingness, not a metaphor, the literal experience of your livingness in this moment right here. And if other thoughts or ideas or plans or worries come up, thank that part of you, the part of you that needs to plan or that needs to be aware of obligations. Thank that part for its job, but tell it right now you're taking a vacation from it. It can rest because right now you're taking a vacation. You'll come back, you'll need it. But right now, you're just going to stay in the immediate sensations and experience of your aliveness right now in this moment, right here. And be quiet for a little bit while you stay with yourself in this way. And not quite now, but when you're ready, in your own time and in your own rhythm, when you're ready, I'll tell you when. Open your eyes, come back into the room, notice who you're with, and notice anything else in your environment that you notice. And as you notice what's outside, notice the relationship and reverberation and conversation between what's outside and what's inside, and that they are all part of one thing. Okay, when you're ready, open your eyes, come back into the room, into the space you're in, and into this little community. And see what stays with you from whatever you have discovered or connected with during the meditation. All right? So we've got about 5 minutes. Anybody want to share anything from this?
Gratefulness, I feel being able to breathe. Breathing comes before all else. I also had open heart surgery and bypass.
Yeah.
So I'm very grateful. Very grateful.
Yeah. Thank you. And you know, this may be something that you don't want to put words to or share right now, but if you want, you know, if you do want to share something, here we are. So I want to say that I'm offering this essentially in contradiction to the fact that we are a machine inside, or that we are a selfish pleasure, selfish self-interest maximizing machine, or any of the other views of what selfhood means that we're offered. And where we're going to take this is more and more of connection. How does connecting to the livingness in you help you feel not separate from, but closer to living this outside of you in its human and non-human forms. And so if you want to practice this a couple of times, experiencing nature in you, life in you, and then seeing how you're experiencing that helps you notice the reverberation, that you reverberate with life outside as you witness it in other beings, whether it helps with your sense of connection and belonging. So the idea being belonging to yourself and belonging to others are not in contradiction, but support each other and are conditions of each other. And that to me is the healing of the polarity that Helga was warning us against. All right. Anything anyone wants to say? We got 2 more minutes.
I believe that meditation does integrate all things more clearly and helping a person to go really much deeper.
Yeah.
I meditated with Maharishi starting in 1964.
Wow.
And I've continued a number of studies where I really feel that it helps a person become much deeper and much less, I don't know if I'm wording that right, less polarity, more integrated into it all, into the cosmos.
So I'll give a little, here's an example. A very unhealthy client of mine once said, my infant only loves me because I feed it my milk. Right? So that's a distinction of self-love, the self-interest in relationship should not, blah, blah. You can see whatever you want to do with that. But that division of love and need and emotional and material support is a pathological confusion.
In the exercise, I was aware of how I can listen with all of me. My whole body can listen, just my ears, my fingers can listen.
Yeah. I had one of my most important mentors was a Reichian therapist, and that involved a lot of touch therapy. And one of the things he said was, before you touch another person, you have to enliven your hand. That it's a violation it's a violation to touch someone with a dead hand. That awakening your hand and the life in you so that you are a living thing touching another living thing, that's a requirement of respectfully touching another human's body. So another place where being conscious and alive in yourself actually helps you to be able to connect to another person. All right. Well, I am honored that you have all come. I hope you all will continue to come. And we're 1 minute over. So anything anybody wants to say besides waving goodbye?
I'm wondering how many other people feel totally overloaded with all that's going on in the world. I'm just feeling so overloaded.
Yeah.
I've been watching the president of Ukraine, President Zelensky. I've been watching episodes of his film called Servant of the People, all spoken in Russian because I do understand a lot of Russian from a refugee mother. So I'm thinking in 2 languages lately.
What's your other language?
Russian.
Russian? Wonderful.
I'm studying it again, yeah, because I forgot how. but I watched Zelensky, President Zelensky of Ukraine, who was a comedian, a history teacher, a comedian, and an actor in these episodes on Netflix. It's really him, and he became president. It's really mind-boggling. He's a comedian.
Hmm.
It's
All
on
right,
Netflix if anyone wants to watch it.
all right, my dears. I'm about to push the red button that will end us for today. And I will
Thank
see you
you very
next
much.
week. I'll be sending you a tape of this session as well as a sort of dry run I did. Will be just me in case you want to share with people that and not the whole experience. Um, and I guess I'll send a copy of the wild geese. Remember that if you use one of our communications that's not the one that I'm sending out as just a how to, class is open. Uh, let's keep a string going so that we have a place where people can um, contribute, can ongoingly share thoughts or poems or anything else that you want to do with everyone else. So that string will have everybody's address on it. And from now on, those will go, the emails will all be visible on the messages you get.
Will you be
Be well.
sending a recording, copy of the recording?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. You'll get a YouTube recording too.
Thank you.
All right. Be well.
Thank you.